It's 1999, the Euro has just been introduced, The Sopranos debuts on HBO, and Toyota launched the 7th generation of the Celica. This Celica isn't remembered with as much fondness as the previous generation. Indeed, some say that it was so ill-considered that it ended up killing off the whole lineage. Let's find out if it's true. So considering what an institution the Celica was, Toyota must have thought long and hard before pensioning it off. Now the question is it something specifically wrong that this car did to kill it all off? Or is there more than that going on? Let's find out. I'm going to talk a bit about the way it drives, a little about the history. But first of all, it's quite interesting that Toyota came up with this car because it was a bit of a departure from the Celicas that had come before. When this was designed, it seems that Toyota was quite intent on trying to lower the age of the buying public. So they were concentrating on making it more affordable. That's both in the way of buying it, but also running it. That means that they really concentrated on weight. It's actually slightly lighter than the version that came before, which doesn't seem like much of an achievement, but when every single new car that comes out is heavier, at that point in time, I think it was a good thing that they did. This in turn meant that it was affordable to run. It's one of the most efficient cars of its time. But does that mean that it's not much fun to drive? Let's see how it feels going down the road, then I'll tell you about the engines and so on. This is the 140 HP VVTi. For 140 horsepower, it really is pretty nippy. This one has variable valve timing, but there was the 190 horsepower version, which also had variable valve lift. Sort of a Toyota VTEC version, if you like. But to be quite honest, that engine didn't do anything different until you went past about 6,000 RPM. So for most normal driving, there's not that much difference between the two. And for 140 horsepower, this feels pretty nippy. I mean, that probably is down to the weight of 1,170 kilos, which is pretty good by the standards of the day and absolutely incredible if you look at today's cars. So when we talk about propulsion, the engine, well, it seems like a good unit. The one thing I would say is not a particularly charismatic engine. It's happy to rev up to well past 6. It's got enough go, enough shove. It's incredibly economical, but it doesn't make an inspiring noise. It doesn't make you think like, wow, the engine is really an important part of this car. It's an instrument that doesn't add a huge amount to the experience. More important though, I think, is the chassis in a car like this. And this is a very good chassis. At the time, the road testers said that it was, some road testers at least, said that it was the best handling front wheel drive car out there. And certainly on my little bumpy, twisty test road here, it is acquitting itself very well. The steering is maybe a little bit on the light side for my preference, but you get good feedback. It's got precision. It's really light, nimble and chuckable. For a front wheel drive car, there's no torque steer to speak of course. It doesn't really have enough power for that. But it's really satisfying to thread through the bends here, through resists understeer really impressively. For a front driver, very neutral through that tight bend there. It's a car that encourages you to chuck it around. It's very forgiving, I guess, having that front-wheel drive chassis, but the suspension is really nicely tied down as well. I think it is the kind of thing that will let you get away with making mistakes without any comeback. What a wonderful little thing. It's got plenty of grip. I mean, it's on quite skinny tyres comparatively, so it's impressive that it does so well. Gets slightly buzzy above 5.5, but not so much that it will stop you revving it. Short throw, exactly where you want it, the gear change. And now we come up to these tightish, but these bends. Leans in a little bit and then just controls it. It's a really good chassis. So far then, I would say that it kind of lives up to the Celica name, certainly in terms of handling. The engine is a little bit lacking in charisma maybe, but it does its job pretty well. Let's look at what else is going on though. First of all, the interior. Well, Toyota interiors tend to be more solid than others, and this car has over 160,000 miles, and you would absolutely not be able to tell by looking inside it. There's only one little hint that it's got anything above 100,000 miles, and that is with the side bolster, which is a little bit discoloured, a little bit worn, but it hasn't even ripped yet. Just a bit of colouring on there, and then look around the rest of it, and it really feels like it could be a car with 40,000 miles on it. So the design isn't maybe particularly inspiring. They could have improved it. The way the dash is made isn't too bad. It's just that it's all one colour. A little bit more pizzazz, Toyota, at this point in time would have been quite handy. Just a bit more contrast. You have a centre panel here. They could have made that a slightly different colour, I think. But the driving position is excellent. The seats are really comfortable, hold you in place perfectly. The wheel is exactly where you want it. So top marks on that side of things. Looks wise, it's a bit more controversial. It's a strange car, this, because when it first came out, I didn't dislike it, I just didn't think anything of it. For a Celica, I think that it was a little bit maybe missing the mark. I think it's grown a little bit on me in the last few years, and it's not a bad looking car. But to me, it just didn't scream Celica. If you look at all the previous models, there was something about them that, you know, was a good fit for that name. Not so much with this. It's got some interesting details, nice little scoop on the bonnet. Maybe just doesn't seem to fit in together quite as well. It's not really aggressive enough in my eyes. Brilliant chassis, forgettable but good engine, okay interior, and divisive looks. I don't think that they're enough to justify what some people say is that this was so bad that it killed off the lineage. In many ways, it's actually a brilliant car, and the target audience, the younger guys who Toyota were aiming for, this was really well suited for. Cheap to run, great fun to drive. What's there not to like? So I don't think the car itself was the problem, but there are two other things that I think made a big difference. The first is that this was the first Celica which didn't have a halo model. Now some people say, oh, the problem was it wasn't rear wheel drive, or a lot of the previous ones, I think the first two generations before this at least, they weren't rear wheel drive either. That's not the problem. The thing was though, that for each of those you had cars like this, which I would class as maybe the cooking models, the base models, which were front wheel drive. But then you had the GT4s, the halo models, and they took them rallying. This didn't really have anything to help lift its image. Yes, the 190 was a bit fruitier than this, the VVTi, but it looked almost identical. And the engine, of course, does have a bit more pep, but chassis-wise, I don't think there were any differences, and to be honest, it doesn't need them. And there was something else that made an even bigger difference. At this point in time, just turning to the 2000s, the car landscape was changing drastically, and in a way that I abhor. We were moving towards crossovers. And the sad truth is simply that coupes just weren't selling as much as they used to. So as a result, it wasn't really a viable product anymore for Toyota. It's sad that that's the case, because I would have loved to have seen more modern versions of the Celica, a hotter version of this. I mean, it would have been interesting because the basis is so good. It's a great chassis. It's a reliable car. It's usable. There's just so much going for it. Now, if you have a look at the prices for these at the moment, because they've not attained the status of the previous ones, they are a bit of a bargain. So I would personally recommend that you go for a base version like this one with 140 horsepower. I don't think you're going to miss the 2ZZ engine with a variable valve lift that much, to be honest, especially most 95% of the time that you're driving it, unless you're a rev happy monster and you love a Honda VTEC type engine, and then maybe you'll like it. But for me, this is a sweet spot. You'll be able to get a better one. I say 2,000 or 3,000, you should be able to get a good car. 160,000 miles this, and it looks brilliant. So a bit of a bargain. If you want a nice sports car that you can commute in, you can have fun in, it's incredibly cheap to run, I would absolutely recommend one. Thank you all so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you for the next video.